Hi guys, my name is Becky and today I'm going to be presenting on Blair Johnston's article on the George Crumb Black Angels. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so you can get a visual idea of some of the things that I'm talking about today. And I'm going to begin this presentation. So like I said, today I'll be presenting on Blair Johnston's article, which is titled Between Romanticism and Modernism and Postmodernism, George Crumb's Black Angels. A little bit about the author. Blair Johnston was the associate professor of music theory at Indiana University Jacobs School of Music at the time that this article was written, but I don't believe that he's there anymore. He's not currently listed on any faculty listings there, and I can't actually find what he's doing currently. So if anybody can fill that in, please let me know. His research focuses include the 20th century orchestral works, electronic music, and analyzing sound recordings. The full thesis of this work can be found in the handout, but a summary of it is as follows. First, Black Angels is the juxtaposition of palindromic symmetry and romantic programmatic narrative on top of each other. The narrative climax is movement 10, God Music, which differs from the palindromic central point, which is movement 7, Threnody 2. And the programmatic narrative analysis provides context for the use of quotation in movements 6 and 8, which otherwise seem a little out of place when compared to the work as a whole. First, let's analyze the palindromic structure of the work. George Crumb describes the work having a lot of emphasis on numbers 13 and 7, and this can be seen in the structure of the piece as a whole. There are 13 movements in the piece, and 7 functions as the central movement. This is Threnody number 2, and this piece is the longest, includes all 4 players, and has the most breadth. Most movements in the work have a symmetrical counterpart, and this can be seen in George Crumb's diagram of the work, which is as follows. So for example, Threnody 1 is symmetrical to Threnody 3 at the very end. The pavane is symmetrical to the sarabande. And a lot of these relationships have similar compositional techniques and thematic materials that return in their symmetrical counterpart. There's some issues to this method of analysis alone though. First off, the piece is actually broken into 3 uneven sections that George Crumb describes. So as you can see, there's departure, absence, and return. And departure has 5 movements, absence has 4, and return has 4. So there's a little bit of unevenness in that regard to the symmetry of the work as a whole. Some of the symmetrical counterparts of movements are often uneven in length. So for example, the ancient voices echo is significantly shorter than the sounds of bones and flutes. And that happens with a couple other pieces in the return section specifically, where these are significantly shorter than their earlier counterparts. And some of the movements actually have no symmetrical counterpart. So some of these works towards the end actually completely differ from their earlier counterparts, symmetrically speaking, in terms of compositional technique and thematic material. Because of these difficulties, Johnston suggests a dual model approach to analyzing this piece. So in addition to the palindromic model that we just discussed, Johnston adds a programmatic narrative model. And this is how this is outlined. Similar to the programmatic narrative that's present in Romantic symphonies and in the literature that we read, there's rising action, going to a climax, and then falling action. And in doing so, Johnston actually argues that the climax of the piece is movement 10, which is God movement, rather than movement 7. Johnston argues this as such because the musical elements from earlier sections of the work actually culminate in this movement. And there are several of them, but just to highlight, this use of the octatonic 2-3 collection is one of the most prevalent features of this movement. In addition, there's this prevalency of B centricity, which is very interesting because Black Angels as a whole is very non-tonal, as we know. But this movement presents some kind of like quasi-tonality, but in terms of there's this centricity of B, even though the work as a whole is not necessarily, the movement as a whole is not necessarily tonal. In addition, the prevalency of the A to D sharp interval is very common throughout the work. And as you can see, this happens throughout the course of the piece, the movement, which begins on A natural and D sharp, in addition to several of the inner portions of the work. These sections can be seen from earlier in the piece as a whole. So just to give you an idea, I won't go into a lot of the specifics that Johnston outlines, but this is the very beginning of Black Angels from the very first movement. We see this B centricity outlined from the very first note that begins on the work And actually, this movement also ends on a B as well. The same octatonic collection is used, and the emphasis of the A to D sharp tritonal access, I won't make you count all these ledger lines, but it's there, is prevalent from the very beginning of the work as separate elements that all culminate within the 10th movement of the work, God Music. Later movements actually start to deconstruct these ideas and present them in different ways, in the same way that falling action would occur in a romantic symphony or literature. So this is a quote from the article itself. It says that if God music culminates, then Threnody 3 perorates or deteriorates. There is little in it that hasn't been heard before in the quartet, and it contains more different kinds of music from more different places in the quartet than any other single movement. Yet as it goes, it seems to unravel the synthesis achieved in God music. Elements evaporate, and the ear struggles to even hear the final pianissimo moments. This model of analysis actually helps understand the quotation that is present in movements 6 and 8. And these moments quote both the Schubert and Renaissance saraband. So, and the specifics of this can be outlined in my handout. So there are tonal elements in these works which are not found in any other movements throughout the entire work. And the tonal sections of the work and the non-tonal insect sounds, which happen simultaneously in the Schubert one, they actually serve as aggregates of each other, which kind of creates cohesion within the movement. And this use of quasi-tonality within God music with the more tonal adaptation of the movements 6 and 8 kind of help bridge the gap between these two tonal movements and the rest of the non-tonal sections of the piece. In addition, Crumb actually adapts these melodies to be a lesser version of what they are. I don't remember if I actually include. He has a diagram in the article itself where he highlights exactly which notes from the original melody is included within this section, and it actually serves as the foundation for the opening of God music. So this sort of tonal adaptation is possible because of the outside quotations and use of tonality within these movements. And these movements can help contribute to the polystylistic compositional approach that George Crumb was experimenting with at the time. So that's just the work as a whole. The combination of the palindromic symmetry with the programmatic narrative that's presented through both of the works kind of help create a dual approach to understanding this piece. So I have discussion questions for you. How does the, here actually I have to move my screen so I can see this better. How does the palindromic center of Black Angels, which is the movement 7, the Threnody 2, and the programmatic climax of the work, which is movement 10, God music, how do they relate to each other? And which seems more significant as a listener? Then, how do specific musical elements like tonality, motive, melody, and form enforce the programmatic model of analysis for Black Angels? And how do they enforce the palindromic model of analysis? So in the middle of the article, Johnston describes in very in detail different elements and how they might contribute to other movements of the work. And so how would that enforce your interpretation of programmatic model and palindromic model, or one versus the other, or one with the other? And finally, how does Crumb's execution of collage, as seen in quotations of earlier movements of the work and quotations of outside musical sources, compared to other collage-inspired works? And if you have one that you really like, you're welcome to put it in the comments below. Anyways, that is all on this article today, and I hope you learned a lot.